Okay.
We won't introduce you because we know who you are.
Okay. My name is Nelson Deuitch, and I'm very glad to be here with you again. I want to just mention one thing to begin with. It is very good to know about the geography of the Holy Land and the weather there and so forth. It helps you to understand the Bible a lot better. But the Jehovah's Witnesses in our area of Newmarket, one of the things that they do is they come around and they explain to people that it makes no sense that Jesus was born December 25th. Now, first of all, we don't know exactly when Jesus was born. But they say it's crazy to have Jesus born in December because you know what kind of weather we have in December. And they say, well, there's no way that Joseph and Mary could have been traveling through all that snow and all that cold and so forth. And again, they don't have a clue as to what is the real situation. Remember, the average temperature for on the coast, like Caesarea, the average yearly temperature is 19 degrees. In Jerusalem, which is of course much higher, it's 2,550 feet high. The average temperature there for the year is 17 degrees. So, walking in the Jordan Rift Valley, it doesn't snow there. There's been one occasion in 1950 they got snow in Jericho. But as far as we know, that's the only time they've ever had snow in Jericho. So Joseph and Mary would have been going right through the Jordan Rift Valley. They would have left Nazareth. They would have headed over towards the Jordan Rift Valley, and they would have gone along by the Jordan River, and then they would have gone up to Bethlehem. So, and remember, they were used to tough situations. They walked everywhere in their life. So again, the weather would not have been a huge problem for them. So that makes no sense. But again, the Jehovah's Witnesses use that and other things to try to get people, to see things from their perspective. Well, the first thing I want to do is take you to a quick review of what I gave you last week. Last week, we spent a fair amount of time on Alexander the Great. Now, if you're like me, you can't remember all this stuff. So you have about 8 or 9 pages here that gives you some information about Alexander the Great, and it's a quick summary of him again, so I urge you to read that. I also stuck in at 1 page on money. It's very good to understand money back then. The typical coin that most people would have had back then was called a denarius. A denarius is about the same size as our dime. I was invited by one of our Princeton professors to his home. The only home of a Princeton professor that I was ever at. And so there are some of us students there. Professor Charles Fritsch, he was the Old Testament man. But one of the key things I remember about being at his house was he had a denarius, and he put it in my hand. I am holding something that is from the time of Jesus, for sure. He found it just off the coast out in the Mediterranean Sea. Why, he hired some people with a boat, and the deep sea divers went down just right close to Caesarea, and they're digging for things like this. So they had this coin. I'll have to admit, I wanted to take that coin and stick it in my pocket and take it home. But anyway, a denarius was 1 day's wage. So 1 full day's wage was a denarius. Remember Jesus, when they tried to pin him against the wall, they said to him, do we pay taxes to Caesar or not? And they're sure they have him up against the wall. Because if he says no to that, don't pay taxes, of course the Romans are going to be mad at him and arrest him. If he says yes, of course all the Jewish people love to pay taxes the same way most of us love to pay taxes, you know. So they have Jesus nailed to the wall, is their view. But Jesus said to them, show me a coin. And they showed him a coin. And this denarius, on one side, it has Caesar on it. So Jesus said, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And on the other side, you know, why it has a Jewish thing on it. And so then he said, render unto God the things that are God's. Anyway, there's a page in what you have right now that tells you about coins, tells you about a talent. A talent was a huge, absolutely huge amount of money. Anyway, please read those. And because I don't have time to go into a whole bunch of things, you know, that I'd like to go into with you. Now let's go back to why I got into Alexander to start all of this. Alexander impacted the world. Few people have done that. But he impacted the world concerning the Scripture, too. Just the very fact that he made it so that Greek was the language that for, how many years? 1,000 years. For 1,000 years, Greek was the language. That, of course, meant that the Apostle Paul and the other apostles, as they traveled around, they could use that common language and they could talk to people about Jesus. Well, back to Alexander. Right after he died, before he was 33 years old, possibly of malaria, and when he died, of course, nobody expected that. And so all at once there is huge chaos among his generals and the top people that were under him. They now have to figure out who's going to rule all of this huge kingdom, you know, that he had just established, all the way from Greece to India. So this is a huge area. And these people were not very nice in this period because they started fighting among each other. They're called the Deuitch, which means the successors. There were 6 main ones. But the 2 main ones that we're going to look at mainly are the one that took over Egypt and the one that took over Syria. And those 2 were Ptolemy and Seleucus. Seleucus ended up taking Syria. And he, of course, wanted Israel as well. Remember, Israel was in the middle. You have Egypt down here of a powerhouse, and then you have some powerhouse up, like it could be the Assyrians, it could be the Babylonians, could be the Persians, but Israel is always in the middle. As armies are going back and forth, they're going right through Israel for this. So many of them wanted to control Israel. So the thing that ended up, why Ptolemy, who was one of his generals, again, Ptolemy ended up taking Egypt. The very last of the Ptolemies was Cleopatra. Cleopatra in 29 BC, why she met her end. along with Mark Antony, the guy that she was with. And the guy that did them in was Octavian, who is better known to us as Caesar Augustus. So in 29 BC, why Octavian went to Alexandria, and he attacked that area, and of course he won. And so both Mark Antony and Cleopatra died at that point. Well, the other main guy here that we're talking about is Seleucus. Seleucus was the guy in charge of the 30,000 soldiers, the ones on foot with the phalanx and the so forth, that I was telling you about. They said that he could hold a bull by his horns. Now, I don't know about you, but I never, a nasty bull, go out and hold a nasty bull by the horns. Why, I can't imagine that. But that's what the sources say about Seleucus, that he could do that. Well, Seleucus ended up ruling Syria, and his son was Antioch the First. So, it was Antiochus. I said Antioch. It was Antiochus the First. So now you know where the name Antioch came from. And he's the one that established Antioch. And of course, later, that's where they first of all became the name Christians, is first known in Antioch. And so all of this sort of this history, it ties together with the scripture. So let's move on here. And now I just pointed out to you, Israel, you can see here, is in the middle of this. So, whoop. Boy, I'm messing all of it up again. Forward. All right. So if I can get this thing here. So here you see the promised land. You have Egypt down here. Then you have the promised land. Then, of course, Assyria, Media. And notice way down here, Mount Sinai. Now, people argue about where that Mount Sinai was. I'm going to show you another spot where later that they think that Mount Sinai was more up in here, closer to the Dead Sea. But I think the traditional site down there, this where it's shown on this map here, that's the one where, it should have, where it actually happened. Of course, Moses got the 10 Commandments there in that area. Note there's two Antiochs here. You have the Antioch of Syria, so that's up here. And then there's another Antioch here, that Antioch of Pisidia that is mentioned in the book of Acts. Another thing that I want to point out to you is Tarsus. You see Tarsus up there? And then Antioch, you have this Cyprus here. I guess in this map you really can't see it very well, but it's got that fingertip that points up right towards Antioch. So right in that area, that's where Alexander the Great had his third battle, the middle one, the second battle with the Persians, and that's where Darius the Third took off, and Alexander ended up with his mother and with his two daughters. Later he's going to marry the oldest one of those two daughters. So again, there's just so much that's happening here. Now, I told you a whole bunch of things about Alexander the Great. Did you believe the things that I told you about Alexander the Great, what happened to him and so forth? There are many professors that are teaching in universities, and they're saying some of the same things, that I said to you last week about Alexander the Great. And they speak about this as if those things actually happened. Well, how do we know those things happened? Here are the official sources for Alexander. The official journal, and by Eumenes and his staff. Alexander knew he was making history, so he set up historians to go with him. And so this was a key source. But notice I put an X through it, because do we have Eumenes' story about what Alexander did? No, it doesn't exist. Ptolemy and Nearchus, they were both generals again, and they wrote things about what Alexander did. We need to put an X through those too, because we don't have them. Oh, and notice with Nearchus, I spelled it with an O in one spot, and over on the other side, why, I spelled it with a U, the next to the last letter. And I did that on purpose, because you will see both spellings there. Now, I am very good at misspelling things, but I wanted to point this out to you, that a lot of these names, especially when you get to the ending, why, we don't know exactly, how it was spelled. Well, all of these that are listed here that you can see, Clisthenes was his nephew. He was the press agent. And later on, Alexander, they didn't get along very well. So Alexander killed him. Alexander, especially as he was getting in the latter part of his 11-year campaign, he was drinking a whole lot more, and he was just not the nice man that he was to begin with. Most of the Greeks that were with him, they just loved him to begin with. But as time went on, why, there got to be a whole lot more friction between them. And of course, there was friction between his nephew Clisthenes and himself, so he killed Clisthenes. But we don't have what Clisthenes wrote about him. We don't have any of these primary sources. None of them exist. So what do we have? We have secondary sources. These secondary sources are all at least 300 years after the time of Alexander. So stop and think. I, of course, grew up as just a young guy with World War II being very prominent. Some of my relatives, of course, were involved in that. And just imagine, though, if you're going to read something about World War II that was written 300 to 500 years later. And that's exactly the case with Alexander the Great. All the sources that we do have are at least 300 to 500 years after the time of Alexander. And the best source for this, if you want to read one of these, I would say to you, read Arrian. Arrian wrote the campaigns of Alexander, but he wrote it around AD 150. That's 450 years after, well more than that, more like almost 500 years, after the time of Alexander. So in the history courses that are taught in many of the universities, they talk to you about Alexander and they go through all this. But then many of those same individuals, when you ask them about Jesus, they start saying, oh, we don't know that much about Jesus. And there's fallacies between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and so forth. So they find all kinds of problems. But when were the Gospels written? Were they written 300 to 500 years after the time of Jesus? No. They're right from the, about as close as you can get to when Jesus actually walked on the earth. I had some of these professors, and I can't understand how they could be so firm about somebody like Alexander the Great, but yet so skeptical about Jesus. It makes no sense to me. The upper millstones. I mentioned to you about the upper millstones and the passage of Scripture, when Jesus said, if you mislead children, it would be better for you to have an upper millstone put around your neck and you cast into the sea than for you to mislead these children. Well, these are a couple upper millstones. Now, they were of various sizes. The upper millstones were huge, like some of these that you've seen. Remember Samson, after he got his hair cut and he had no strength anymore, and so he ended up being taken to Gaza. And where he was in Gaza, now he is pushing one of these upper millstones around the lower millstone. Now, I'm sure the one that he was pushing was a pretty hefty one. But there were smaller ones. One of the kings by the name of Abimelech, he was a wicked king. But the way he got killed was he's attacking one of the cities, and there was a woman up on the top of the wall, and she had an upper millstone, and she dropped it over the side, and it hit him right on the head. Now, it didn't kill him immediately, but he knows he's only got about this much time, left before he's going to die. So he said to the guy next to him, take your sword and kill me. He said, I don't want it to be known, that I was killed by a woman, But this upper millstone, of course, would have just been one that was used in a domestic household. So there's different sizes on these millstones. The millstones, of course, they used them to make olive oil. So what did they use the olive oil for? Lamps. Remember the 10 virgins? The 10 virgins, 5 of them had plenty of oil. The other 5 didn't. This is a parable that Jesus is telling. So, of course, those that didn't have enough oil, right away they said to those that had oil, give us some of your oil. But the others, now yes, I know we're taught as Christians we're to be generous and to help others. But this is a parable that Jesus is giving to make a key point. So those 5 said to the others, no, it's in the middle of the night, But they said, you go buy some, And so off they went, and you know the story. But in the story, Jesus is teaching the principle of we need to be ready and we need to be prepared. Well, these are a couple examples. Actually, you see 3 of them here. These in general were not all that big. Now, the one on the right that you see here, that is a very simple one for somebody to make. But there were some of these, that were very beautiful. Now, you cannot look at one like the one on the right and say, oh, that one is much older than the one on the left. Because, again, you start with the primitive, and then like with automobiles, the automobiles that we drive now are a whole lot different than the ones, back in, let's say, in 1910 or something like that. They keep making improvements, of course. So with these 2 lamps, why, you wouldn't say the one on the right is an improvement, But you can't date these things by this kind of reasoning. when cities were destroyed back then, they brought in the bulldozer. Now, of course, you know, they didn't have bulldozers back then, but they brought in the human bulldozers, you know, and they literally wiped the city out again, and then they would rebuild. And then that city would be destroyed. The city of Jerusalem was destroyed over 50 times. So, you know, many of the cities back then, they were destroyed many times. So the archaeologists, when they're digging down through this stuff, you know, the first level that they come to, of course, that's the latest. And then you go down to the next level, which, you know, that would be several years prior to the one up top. But that's how scholars date many of these things. As they dig down, they know the further they keep digging down, the older that it is going to be. I personally saw one of these that was just gorgeous. And they dated it from the time of Moses. But this one on the right, you know, you might say, well, do you want to have that in your home? But if you would have seen this one that was from the time of Moses, you know, 1,400 years before the time of Christ, it was just gorgeous. So you can't date things just simply because one looks more primitive, you know, than the others. The upper millstone here and the olive oil, of course, you find this in all of the cities and so forth. Now, I want you to look at this map again, and I want to remind you that on the right-hand side, the Transjordan side here, that's where you have 4 wadis or rivers. And it is helpful if you can memorize those. The first one's just at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. That's the Yarmouk River. Then the next one down that sort of goes into the middle of the Jordan River between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, that's the Jabbok. Think of it, jab. So it jabs in the middle in there. And then the next one on down is the Arnon River, and then this map doesn't show the bottom one. The bottom one comes in at the very bottom of the Dead Sea, and it's called the Zered. Now, these wadis are what separates the areas and separates the people. So if you want to know where Moab was between the Arnon and the bottom one down, and the Zered. And I pointed out to you last time about Ruth. Remember Ruth and Naomi. So when Naomi and her husband and 2 sons left Bethlehem, they had to get over to the other side. Now, you can't just say, well, let's swim across the Dead Sea. Well, one thing, anybody can float in the Dead Sea. In fact, there have been a lot of people that have died in that, even though they can float, because they got on their stomachs. And I've been told that people who especially are a little overweight and so forth, they get on their stomachs in the Dead Sea like that. And yes, they float, but after a while, you can't hold your head up. And so they drowned in there if there isn't somebody, you know, to rescue them. But when you're standing on the west side of the Dead Sea and you look over across, it just looks like one huge wall over there. You're looking across 10 miles, but you can see it very easily. Now, again, I've been there. I've seen this. And you look over there, and it just looks like that huge wall over there. Moab is 5,000 feet above sea level. Do you remember what I told you about how the Dead Sea is? It's 1,300 feet below sea level. Lowest spot on the face of the earth. at the surface of the water. And then it's another 1,300 feet deep. So anyway, when you're standing there on the west side of the Dead Sea, I mean, that's the 1,300 feet plus the 5,000. You're well over 6,000 feet. So it's up high. So when Naomi and the three guys with her, when they left Bethlehem, you know, they're up fairly high. And they have to go down in the valley, and then they have to get over to the other side. I, of course, don't know whether they went up to the top of the Dead Sea and went that way, or whether they went down to the bottom. But whichever way they're going, they had to go way down quite a ways, down through the valley, and then go up high again. So this is not an easy walk for them. But as you understand geography, then put yourself in the place of Naomi and Ruth, and then you can start thinking a little more about their walking. Now, this wasn't easy for them, doing all this walking. Now, look at this. Let me point out. So I'm going up, down through sort of the center of on the west side. This is where, you know, only the 2.5 tribes stayed over on the Transjordan side, but the rest of Israel, you know, when they went in there. But again, that's high up. If you're over on the, say around Joppa or Caesarea, you're at sea level. But then, if you're going to start to go up in that hill country, again, you know, it's quite a walk trying to go up that hill. Now, I gave you the great scientific idea about water. How does water get there? Remember, they have 6 months of dry season. No rain. Yes, on occasion, sometimes, you know, you will get some rain. But basically, there's no rain during this time. This is the summertime. Summer there is like for us. We grow our crops during the summer. How in the world do you grow crops with no rain? Well, it's dew. Dew comes from, and this is in the morning, it comes from the Mediterranean Sea, called the Great Sea. And remember, I gave you the great description of we're all carrying buckets of water. And you got 2 5-gallon pails in your hand. Well, how far do you get with that water when you're going up to the top of the hillside up there? For me, I get almost nowhere. I've lost all my water, you know. The real strong ones in our midst, you know, some of them, they make it to the top of the hill, you know, and they still have some water. Well, this, I'm trying to get the point across to you that this is why that part, the western half with that line drawn through there, that side is where they get good water. So it is the best watered with the dew. Now, I also told you those that made it to the top of the hill still with some water in their buckets, they grab their buckets and boom, they give it a big toss, because at that point they say, I'm not walking all the way down this hillside, you know, with this water. I'm just going to give it a toss. And of course the wind comes along and grabs it and takes it off. Now that part is scientific, because that's what the wind does with the dew. It grabs that dew right at that point, and it takes the majority of it over to the Transjordan, way up on the hill, over there on the other side. So they have water over there. Now, some of it, yes, goes on down, you know, on that other side. Now, I want you to see this Jordan Rift Valley. This is one of the most unique things on all of earth. You start up here, you see that little lake up there at the top? That's Lake Hula. Lake Hula is 2,030 feet above sea level. And then you drop in about 7, 8 miles, something like that, and you get to the top of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is 700 feet below sea level. So it drops over 900 feet in that fairly short distance. And then going from there, from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, you go from 700 feet below sea level to 1,300 feet below sea level. So how did all of this Jordan Rift Valley form? Now I'm going to tell you my best scientific theory as to how that happened. Mighty Casey. He was a tremendous baseball player. He made Babe Ruth look like he was nothing, you know. He was a giant hitter, and he's standing on top of Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is 9,100 feet above sea level. So he's standing way up on top. And of course, the Dead Sea is not there at that point. But there is a pitcher who is standing roughly around the Dead Sea. And he looks up at Mighty Casey and he says, "I can strike you out with 3 pitches." Casey says, "All right, fire away." So the first pitch, boom, he missed it. Ugh, he's upset. Throw the second one. He threw the second pitch, and again, boom, he missed it. And then he's really upset. Boy, he glared at that pitcher. He said, "Throw the third one." Well, he threw the third one, and boom, he missed again. In his great anger, he took that bat and he went slam, and he slammed the earth so hard the fat of the bat made the Dead Sea. You know how a bat is. It goes up like this. So what made the Sea of Galilee? You know that little knob on the bat? That little knob on the bat made the Sea of Galilee. And then the bat, when it hit the ground, it bounced up in the air. This is a huge bat now. This bat, when it hit the ground, it bounced back up again, and it went further on down, and it also made another indentation going on down towards that one rabbit ear of the Red Sea. So that's how it was formed. Now, I haven't had any scientific journal get a hold of me and say, "Nelson, write that story up. We want to print it in our journal." I don't know what's wrong with them, you know, but you know what? Here's a book right here that's called The Geography of the Bible by Dennis Bailey. And it tells you how all of that was formed. It uses the theory of evolution. It talks about millions and millions of years and earthquakes that happened and so forth. And that's how of that Jordan Rift Valley was formed. There's a whole bunch of pages in here on this book. I think that theory is just about as scientific as the theory I just gave you about Mighty Casey and the bat. Anyway, this is an amazing Jordan Rift Valley. But you can understand now, remember the 2.5 tribes, they stayed on the Transjordan side. Just picture yourself, you're somewhere over on where the other tribes, you know, moved over on the other side, the main part of the of Israel, when you live there, how often are you going to go see those people over on the Transjordan side? You got to go. Now, yes, as the crow flies, it's not a huge distance, mileage-wise. But, you can't just measure things by the way the crow flies. You got to go all the way down, get across the Jordan River, go high up over on the other side, and then you go see your friends. And so, it's not an easy trip. And that's one of the reasons why the 2.5 tribes, as some time went on, they just got sort of amalgamated over there, and they got lost out of the picture of the main part of Israel. So, you're looking at Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon has snow on it every month of the year except for July. So there's snow all the time on top of it. Again, it's 9,100 feet up, so I'm told that you can see it from Jericho on a clear day. I wasn't smart enough when I was in Jericho to try and look back up to see if I could see it. So never dawned on me at that point. But if you ever get there, turn and look and see if you can see Mount Hermon from up there. It's very visible in that whole area. Now, I put this map in here to try and show you a few things. So there is Mount Hermon. It is 20 miles long. So 20 miles long. And so it is very noticeable. Now, I pointed out some other things. Here's Giscula. Probably none of you know anything about Giscula, but later we're going to be talking about that because there was a man there named John of Giscula, and he was a key enemy of the Romans, and Josephus did not like him at all either, so you're going to hear some more from me as some time goes on here about John of Giscula. You look over here, you see Tyre. Tyre is almost directly across from the bottom of Mount Carmel, or Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon, when you get at the bottom of it, you're now at New Testament times. It's called Caesarea Philippi. In 200 years before that, it was called Paneas or Banias. And there are 4 streams that form the Jordan River before it gets to Lake Hula. And the one furthest to the east is one that is right by Caesarea Philippi. So here's another picture of Mount Hermon. Notice this rugged area. Do you notice all the stones there? One of the first things I noticed about when you visit Israel is one of the key things that you see are rocks. There are rocks everywhere. How did the Israelites kill people when they got mad at somebody? They stoned them. There are stones all over the place. Of course, many of them are way too big, for you, but you can always find a stone, to throw in that country. So, what about it today? I just told you there's snow on this mountain almost all the time. And so, of course, today, big-time ski resorts there. And, of course, this area has been fought over for centuries. Lebanon today, of course, wants to control it. Israel wants to control it. So, but back to the base of this, one of the 4 streams that is going to form the Jordan River. This is one of them right here. It's the easternmost one. The water suddenly appears. So here you are standing right beside of this. You can see the people there in the background, so of this mountain, but you've got these pools right here, and just all at once the water is there. And you wonder, well, where's this water come from? Well, of course, we know it comes from the melting snow, from Mount Hermon. But what happened here as some time went on, this has always been, Mount Hermon has always been a place of the gods. So they worship the gods here. And one of the things that they would do is they would take an infant and they would throw that infant into this water right here that you're looking at. Eusebius, who was a church historian, Eusebius was writing about AD 350. He tells a story in here. I don't have time to try and read it to you, but he tells the story about a Christian man who was watching them as they threw this small child into this water. The thing that always happened, they'd throw the child into the water and the child would disappear. Of course, in their view, the gods have accepted their offering. But he prayed to God. He said, God, please stop this. And the child came back up again floating. And then they stopped doing it. So that's a story. Eusebius tells a bunch of real interesting stories. But now, do you see these right there, and right there, and right there? These are pan niches. This is to the god Pan. Pan was a goat-footed, lustful god who always had his playmates, the female nymphs, along with him. So this whole area right here, again, is just livid with temples and all kinds of false god stuff. Jesus took the disciples there. And this is Matthew 16. Matthew 16, he took them there, and he's standing right in this very same spot. And I hope you get to go there someday. It is amazing to stand there. And Jesus asked the question, who do men say that I am? And of course, they answered, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Jeremiah, one of the prophets, But then Jesus, of course, said, well, who do you say that I am? And then, of course, Peter gave the answer that we know, that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. But this is the place where Jesus chose to ask this question. And so, geography-wise, it gives it a whole lot more meaning. Well, these are the foothills, again, of Caesarea Philippi. Now, you see a lot of greenery in this area. A lot of this, as to how green things are, it depends on when they take the picture. Things aren't always green like this. But this is Lake Hula. Now, again, you see Mount Hermon in the background there. Now, the traditional Lake Hula is not there anymore because after Israel took over in 1948, they have basically taken all of the water out of that lake. That lake was 3 miles long by 2 miles wide. And so in the older, when you look at the maps of going back biblical times, of course, they show you Lake Hula. But there's no Lake Hula there today. This is what it looks like today. They've turned it into a nice area where they can grow things and so forth, but they have created a huge problem because this swampy area here before always filtered out some of the bad stuff from the water. And so now modern Israel has created some ecological problems. And I'll explain more about that later. And so now we go down to the Sea of Galilee. On the eastern side, you see that area right there? The eastern side, except for very little, never has any green on it. It's not the kind of place you want to move into that area. You know, it's you can understand, you know, remember the Gadarene demoniac and what happened with him, and then the 2,000 of the animals that they went right down into the Sea of Galilee. As you look at that hillside over there, and in places it's a lot steeper than others. And again, it makes sense. That's exactly, you know, what happened. Now, the Sea of Galilee has rough storms. And it's 13 miles long by 7 miles wide, but it's great fishing. It's, again, 700 feet below sea level. This, again, just shows where Tiberias is. Tiberias was built by Herod the Great. Herod the Great had 10 wives, so he had a lot of kids. But one of his kids was Herod Antipas. So when you're reading in the Gospels, other than when you're talking about the birth of Jesus, why, of course, Herod the Great, you know, was alive then. But as you read on in the Gospels, why, the Herod that's always mentioned in the Gospels is Herod Antipas. So that was by his fourth wife. I can't remember what her name was, Malthrace or something like that. But anyway, Tiberias was made in between 18 and 20 AD. So it's a new city in the time of Jesus. It was built on a cemetery. So there were a lot of Jewish people who said, we're not going there because it's built on a cemetery. There's no record of Jesus ever being there. Here again, you can see the Transjordan side, how bleak it is over there. This is modern Tiberias, and it has very good access to the lake. The feeding of the 5,000 and the demon-possessed man, of course, that all happened over on the rough side, on the Transjordan side. This is Mount Abel, back during the Crusades. So this would be about 1187 or something like that. The English Crusaders, they're up on top of that little point, you know, that I just showed you, which that goes way on back. They're on top and the Arabs are down below. Well, there's no water. That's always the problem. You know, high up on the hills, there's no water. So they are so thirsty up there, they're looking down at that beautiful Sea of Galilee down there, and finally they just got to the point, okay, we got to have water. So down they went, and of course they got killed by the Arabs. So this here, I'm not sure, but I think that's where we're at the south end of the Sea of Galilee, and I think that's the Jordan River as it goes out. The Jordan River at that point is not a whole lot different than your river that's right out here, you know, the Grand River. I think it's only like 30 feet wide or something like that right there. I remember we went just a little ways on down it, and the Jordan River is in average depth, it's 4 feet to 10 feet in depth. So I've heard people say, well, you can't baptize anybody in the Jordan River because it's only knee deep, you know, or, well, again, they don't understand anything about this. So anyway, this is Capernaum. You see that doorway at the back. Oh, wait. Got to get the next one. You see the doorway at the back there? This is a 2nd century one. Remember, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed so many things, you know. So here we are in Capernaum. So the Jews did come back, and they built a synagogue back there. I'm sitting on the left side right here. There's about 45 people in our group, and I was always the last one because I still wanted to stay longer, you know, to see this. But our driver and our guide, he said, come out of there. They'd already warned us about that doorway back there. They said, that is very short, be very careful. Well, I'm the last person. And Kate, my wife, had yelled to me, Nelson, come on. Okay, all right, I took off running. I forgot to duck. If you go to that doorway, you're going to see a big dent in that stone thing up there, and it was because of this dumb head, you know, that hit it. I am laying there on that little area right there. I'm laying there thinking, oh no, I'm going to the hospital. I'm not going to be able to go on the rest of this trip. Oh, you dummy, you know. And of course I'm feeling with my head, and pretty soon I looked at my hand, no blood. Well, of course, I didn't put a dent in it, but I think it put a dent in me. Well, of course, in Capernaum, you have the olive presses. You know, again, this is Chorazin, which is a little bit north of there. This is a 3rd or 4th century synagogue, so they had synagogues there. This is Elijah's chair. In all of the synagogues, they have an empty Elijah's chair because they're waiting for the coming of Elijah. And of course, remember, what did Jesus say who Elijah was? John the Baptist. So anyway, when we were here, there was a cat sitting there. So I saw Elijah's cat. Well, again, you see the olive press. This is in Chorazin. That's this. Okay, this is the plain of Gennesaret. The plain of Gennesaret is on the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. It is one of the most fertile areas on the face of the earth. You can grow anything there. You can grow a walnut tree there. Walnut trees only grow up here. Orange trees grow down in Florida. They can't grow walnut trees down in Florida. But here, you can grow walnut trees, you can grow anything. It is a marvelous area. This is Mount Arbel that I was telling you about, where the Crusaders won, the high one, on the left-hand side there. So this is the plain of Gennesaret again. You can see it's a very fertile area. Notice all of the buildings. Why do we do this thing? The best farmland in the whole area, why, we got to put some buildings up on it, you know. And that's exactly what modern Israel, you know, has done to that. All right. I'm finished with what I wanted to say to you about all of this. So I hope you will bear with me next time. We're going to be getting into the Jordan River some more and the Dead Sea. So, and I hope you never forget my great theory about how the Dead Sea was formed. So, I haven't found Mighty Casey's batch yet, but who knows. So, all right. Okay.